This is Levine. The date today is
Levine.
Levine. The date today is January 6, 2019. And Levine has been nice enough to talk about what he did in World War II. And we're going to start, first of all, where you went to grade school, where you were born, what date you were born, and then where you went to high school. So just tell us those things.
I was born February 4th, 1922 in Marietta, Ohio. We moved to Lancaster, Ohio when I was 6 years old, and I went to North grade school. And from grade school I went to Lancaster High School. And from there, after about a year at graduation, I volunteered to go into the Army. And at that time, I got notice that I was going to be drafted, but I went down and volunteered to go in as a volunteer rather than be drafted.
What year was that when you volunteered? About 41 or 42?
About 42.
Okay.
42.
Okay.
And once I was volunteered, I was called to the Columbus, Ohio, where they took the recruits, and we took our physicals, and we were given our uniforms and shoes and so on and so forth. And from there, I went to Keesler Field, Mississippi, and took my basic training. And I was there for 6 weeks, basic training. And then we were sent to Scottsfield, Illinois, where I took radio mechanic work. And from there, I got a week's leave before I had to report back, and we went to I got to think where we went to. Went to Smyrna Army Airport, just out of Nashville, Tennessee. And my job was my job was to, I can't say the word I want.
Radio type things for Air Force, Army Air Corps.
We checked the radio on the P-47s, and I would say that was one of the first push-button radios ever out. And we had to be out there before the pilots took over the plane, and that was about it.
Okay, the P-47s are pretty important in World War II. The P-47s, there were about 10,000 P-47s made. It's the same plane that crashed with the University of Evansville basketball team. That was a P-47. They had 2 engines, and they held about 20 to 24 people is what they held, the P-47s. But you did the radio for that.
The P-47 was a fighter plane.
Okay. The P-47, excuse me. Yeah, P-47. Okay, it's a C-47. I talked just about the C-47. You're right. So the P-47 was a fighter plane that's up behind you. And I think those are P-47s behind you above Churchill there. P-47s are germane to Evansville. We made 6,200 in Evansville. We made 8,000 in Farmington, New York, or Farmingdale, New York. So P-47s was a fighter plane. It was a fighter and a semi-bomber, and also could send missiles off. It weighed 17,000 pounds. All the other fighters in World War II weighed about 6,000 to 9,000 pounds. The Messerschmitt that made 38,000, the Spitfire about 20,000, and the Zero about 10,000. But all those were much lighter planes. This was a heck of a plane. It was what they called the Jug. It was very tough to knock down. It was, out of all the fighter planes, it was the only air-cooled plane. All the others were water-cooled. That means one bullet hit the other ones and they were down. They couldn't keep their engine cool enough. So you did the radio. We have a pilot on our board at the Evansville Wartime Museum, Alan Sanderson. He's 95 years of age right now, and he was a pilot for the P-47. So the radios were very important in World War II, and so you helped with the P-47 radio down there in Tennessee.
That is correct.
And then after you left Tennessee there, or where did you go from there?
We went to port of embarkation, and was close to Norfolk, Virginia. And we got on a ship, a boat, I guess they call it the ship, A.E. Anderson.
Was it a Liberty ship?
No, this was a big passenger
Ship.
that was converted
I see. Okay. And took you over to England?
over to India.
India. Okay.
India.
How did you go through? Did you go south of Africa, or did you go through the Mediterranean?
We went through the Panama Canal, down around the bottom of Australia, up through the China Sea, and landed in Bombay, India.
How many on that ship? 4,000?
I would say 3,500, 4,000.
Okay. And we're about 1943 now, are we not?
Right,
Okay.
right.
Then in Bombay, tell us, did you get on a train, or what did you do after that?
And when Bombay, we went to a camp. I've got the name of the camp if you want it.
That's all right. Just Bombay's fine.
And we stayed there for about 3 weeks, and then we got orders to get on a train and go across India to Chabwa, India. And that excursion there, we went about halfway across India, and they changed the railroad gauges so the Japanese couldn't use the trains. And we were to meet a crew there to pick up the other train. Well, after about 2 days, the crew never came, and so one of the boys said, well, I can drive this thing. So he got on the locomotive and got it started, and we went to another area because we hadn't had a shower, cleaned up or anything, and we stopped at a camp, and they fed us, and we showered and cleaned up, and took off the next morning, went up to Chabwa. And that was a railroad center, which food came into there, and I was stationed about 15 miles from there out on a tea plantation. And we had about 15 of us with a lieutenant, and we set up this Levine equipment, Army Airway equipment, for the planes to guide over the hump.
So the hump is pretty important in World War II, but I'll explain it and you amplify or elaborate on it there, Irv. But what was happening in China is that the Japanese were taking over China, and they were going to cross a very important river over there. So the Americans understood that, and we had to send supplies to China, and there was no easy way to get it there except flying the hump. And that's what you're going to talk about, is flying the hump. The hump is the Himalaya Mountains And the minimum altitude you had to get was about 14,000 feet. You had to sometimes get 18,000 feet. You didn't have good weather reports. And they called it Aluminum Alley because there were so many planes that were crashed during that flying the hump. And the P-47s were the protector planes. They were the fighters, and they would protect these big the big C-46s. The C-46s brought supplies over, 2 great big engines. They had a lift of 46,000 pounds, and they would lift all the oil over to China. You'd land on an airstrip, a grass airstrip, or made of Martzen mats, and then all of a sudden, then they come back to to India empty. But a guy named Mr. Brinker from Evansville just died. He was 94, and he flew many missions over the hump, exactly where you were at the same time. So then tell us about a little bit what your experiences were in India, and then when you went over, if you went over to China or not, or what the experiences were that people came back from China and talked about.
Well, I want to bring in the fact that we were close to the Lido Road. And at that time, we were fighting the Japanese, I'd say maybe 50 miles from there. And my experience of going over the hump was only when I was transferred to China. I asked for a transfer to China, and we operated the same equipment in China that we did in India. And I would say that that encompassed at least 12 months before I was transferred over. I asked for a transfer into China. And the people in India, we were about 50 yards from a native village. And this was tea plantation, and these people worked in the field, picking the tea and cultivating it. And there was another big house owned by an Englishman who owned the tea plantation. While we were there, we were all sitting around having dinner, and the natives came running up to us that they got a tiger had killed one of the natives, and they wanted to know if we would go out and try and get them. Well, we all jumped in, we had our guns, and so we all went out, and they had a trap, and the tiger had fallen in the trap, and so we shot the tiger.
A Bengal tiger?
Bengal tiger.
Mm-hmm.
I've got pictures if you want. And then we brought the tiger in and roped it up to a tree close by, and the mate came out that night and growled and hauled while we were trying to sleep, and he left, and we skinned the tiger and we drew a lottery, and unfortunately I didn't get it, or fortunately, one or the other. And so I was in India there, in China, I guess 2 years, over 2 years.
How did you get to China? Did you drive or did you fly?
We flew over the hump.
In what kind of plane? Do you remember?
C-47.
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 Yeah, and what was that? That was a transport of people. The C-47, they made 10,000 in World War II. They were busy over the hump, too. The C-47 was what we dropped parachuters out in World War II. Over the D-Day time, they dropped 50,000 parachutes out of a C-47. That's what the plane crash happened in Evansville. It had two props on it. The P-47 is one prop. But it was a transport of individuals, not of material. The C-46 transported material. The lift on a C-47 was 26,000 pounds. The lift of a C-46 is 46,000 pounds. So much stronger. The C-46 is much stronger. But they transported you and about 20 other guys over the hump. How was the landing in China, and what were the Chinese people like when you got over there?
Well, when we descended, they had a landing strip for the plane.
Concrete or grass?
It was concrete.
Concrete, okay.
It was concrete. And And then they met us with the weapon carrier and took us into our station and camp in Kunming, China. It's not called Kunming now. They've changed names on it. And we lived there until the war ended, and we received our orders, and I've got a list of the orders if you'd like to have them. And my name finally came up. Every morning on the bulletin, they would have a list of name of the soldiers that were going to be transported back to the United States. So my name finally came up, and we took a plane back to
somewhere in India.
some place in India, and I don't know if it was around Calcutta or no, but anyway, no, we went back to Bombay, and we caught a marine boat. It was called the Wolf, and it was a smaller one, and there was probably 1,000 soldiers of us that got on that. Coming back,
How'd you go back? Did you go back the same way you came, or you go back through the Mediterranean?
we went back through the Mediterranean and past the Philippines and Hawaii and on into Seattle, Washington.
What year was that? 45 or 44? When you got out, about 45?
About 45.
War was over?
War was over. War was over. I'd like to digress one place.
Sure.
When we left, going back, when we got to Australia, down the bottom of Australia, when we left the States, there was a warning out when we landed, when we docked in Australia, at the bottom of Australia, Melbourne, that the Japanese submarines were in the China Sea. And so we delayed a couple of days, and then we took off. And there were several nights that they stopped the motors completely, so the submarines couldn't pick it up. But we finally made it into Bombay, and we were very fortunate that we weren't torpedoed.
Pretty scared.
Yeah. And then I'm going to jump back to when we coming back on the Marine.
On the Wolf, ship called the Wolf or something with the Marines, 1,000 Marines on there, yeah.
Yeah, right. And we, going back to the Philippines with quite a few days, we had storms and so forth, and we ran out of food. So they passed out candy bars for us to eat till we got to the Philippines, so we could get food back on the ship. And then we went to Hawaii, and then on into Seattle.
And then when you checked out of the service in Seattle, did you take a train back across the country?
I took a train back and landed back in Columbus, Ohio. My parents picked me up there in Columbus, Ohio, and I came back to Lancaster, Ohio.
Were the trains very crowded?
It was packed.
Yeah.
Yes.
How old was it?
Yeah. It was a passenger train, and it took us
3 days to get back to Ohio.
4 days. Oh, yes. Easy. Yes.
Other people are going to be hearing this. I want a couple other things here. I'm going to put your uniform here. And this right here, this is a symbol. That little symbol is the very few people have that. That symbol is the hump. And tell us a little bit what the hump means.
This here.
Yes.
Well, the hump. There was natives who lived up on the hump, and they would come down with stones and rocks and so forth and try to sell it to us. And not knowing jewelry, why, we didn't buy any of it. Some of the boys did, but I didn't. And they were big, strong, very friendly natives. Their hands were twice as big as mine, and at that time it was snow up in the mountains. They came down so to be where it was warmer, and it was something to be at the base of the Himalayas.
And then this little symbol here, or I'm going to let that put in front of you there. That symbol, only people that have been at the hump get that symbol. That's a very rare symbol to get in World War II. If you were based at the hump, that means either in India or in China, you got to wear that little dot there. But that's that little red dot with the star and then the wings on the side. But that's a rare thing to have as a World War II veteran, to have that. That's the Army Air Corps, but that said you the hump. You did the hump there.
That was issued to us right there in India before we departed India.
Now your other jacket has a little radio sign on it. I will put that up here as well. That radio, you have a little radio because you were a radio expert in the war. That you were the radio man for really the P-47s more than the C-47s, but we'll have that right here. This little symbol is your, let's see, that's your radio symbol, is that not right there?
That's right.
That's your radio symbol. What's that symbol there?
That is the honorable discharge.
Honorable discharge,
Yes.
okay. And then that's your rank. What was your rank there?
Sergeant.
Sergeant. What's this symbol here?
CBI.
CBI, meaning what?
China, Burma, India.
Pretty rare to have that. China, Burma, India, and then this is your rank here, right, Sergeant?
That's
Sergeant. That's something else.
Yeah, that's. If I'm not mistaken, that was
Enlisted.
maybe how many years I was in service.
Right.
Yeah, 3.5, 4 years, yeah. And then you have a little symbol here, a little fly. That's Army Air Corps. Army Air Corps, which is, we had no Air Force then. We had just Army. And this knife, can you tell us a little bit about that knife?
Oh, yeah.
Well, this knife here,
Pull it out of there and show it.
Be careful.
I didn't.
It's real
Fortunately,
sharp.
I didn't have to use it, but this fit on the end of a carbine rifle, and this was the bayonet part of the rifle, and as I repeat myself, I'm glad I didn't have to use it.
Yeah, yeah. And then we've got another little piece of paper. Pull that piece of paper and put it in front of you. Tell us what happened to Navy guys when they crossed the equator there. You pull that and put it in front of you so people can read it here. Yeah, I can't. Yeah, we'll read it. That's fine. That's called, what do they call that? That's,
Right across the top.
when you cross, it's called Impervum Nepavi Regius. It's when you cross the equator, they initiated you, right?
Imperial Nepotivne
Neptune, yeah.
Regis,
King.
and anybody who crossed the equator received one of these.
And you got initiated. Wasn't too much fun.
No, practically stripped down to your underwear.
Yeah. And they beat you up or did whatever. Now they got to be nicer. They can't be mean to you anymore. Yeah. Okay, that's fine. Okay, now put that down there. Now, Irv, tell us about fear. I want to know a little about fear and what your parents thought about World War II. You know, you were in high school and Hitler was dealing with, already ran over Poland. He already ran over Austria and everything else, and your parents undoubtedly told you that, and and he was very mean to the Jewish people too. Your parents had to have some feelings about that. Can you tell us about what your parents thought about that?
Well, yes. Back then, it was strictly radio, no TV, and my father would have the Lowell Thomas news on every evening. If I remember right, 6:45 to 7 o'clock, while we reading, and we'd hear all the news, and we had a radio in the car when we go to work, and we would hear about all the bombings going on in London, and the main thing about the war, we had a rabbi who happened to be in Poland when Germany invaded Poland. And he had a big scar on his neck and face where he'd been slashed by one of the German soldiers. And fortunately, he was able to get out, and the group of Jewish people, we had clubs that would bring people over and pay for their transportation and so forth. And he lived in Columbus, Ohio, but he would come down to Lancaster, Ohio, about 25 miles away, and conduct services for us. And he told us at that time that the United States better do something, or we'd be in it worse than we already were. And
He said that 1939, 1940.
1939, 40.
Yes.
Yeah, back then. And it was very moving, and I was young then, 15, 16 years old, and I just took it for granted and didn't think anything about being drafted into the Army, but and after I got out of high school, I was drafted and I volunteered.
Did your parents very scared that we were going to lose our freedom, or were they not very scared?
Or if they were, they never discussed it with us.
I see.
I had two sisters, and there was just never too much discussion about that, except the massacres gone over by Hitler of the German people, of the American Jewish people.
One of the core twins is up there in Terre Haute. They just had a special on TV. She was one of the twins that they Eva, Core, I believe, is a core.
I missed that on TV. I meant to get it,
but she lives in Terre Haute, and she's one of the surviving twins. But she's given lots of talks in the United States on that. But what do you think about the freedom in the United States? You're now, how old are you? 94.
96.
You're 96. What do you think about these young kids that we're going to talk to this next week or so about how they should cherish freedom? And what do you think about, our privileges versus our rights, and how nice a country this is?
Well, I'll say this, appreciate what you got here, because you go to these foreign countries, they're confined, they have strict rules, especially in India and China. It was filthy, and the beggars, which would be sitting down on the ground along the street, and they'd have a great big cuts in their leg, exposed to the bone, begging for money. And
Yeah, you saw two of the poorest civilizations in the world. You saw India and you saw China, and they're both third world countries at that time, and you had to see such poverty and an infrastructure that didn't have things like ours of nice plumbing, nice highways, nice cleanliness, nice everything else, and those things we all take for granted, but they still don't have all those things.
Well, might add that since you brought that up, when we were on the tea plantation, there was no such thing as toilet paper. We had it, thank goodness, but they would use water to clean themselves up, and then just drop it right there.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate it. Do you have any other things or any other questions that Paul, Dottie, you may have?
Only the fact that, to this period, how old were you?
How old were you in the war?
From the beginning until you...
18 to 22 in the war about?
Or
I was
15?
about, I had to be about that age, yeah.
If you're born in 22, then you'd be 18 in 1940. So you'd have been 19 and 41, about. So if you're age 19 to 23, that's a young part of your life. You weren't as scared as these older people, but...
Well, when you're at that age, you're willing to do almost anything. I mean, you don't think too much about danger. I mean, you take a chance. And, I mean, that's all. Back then, that was just all part of life, which is different than I would be today. Put it that way.
Now behind you got a man, and I know you don't know who's behind you, but a guy named Hitler, or not Hitler, but a guy named Churchill's behind you. That's Churchill. What do you think? Do you think he was pretty instrumental in helping in World War II? And what are your thoughts about him?
Oh yes, I got that after the war. My wife and I, we took a trip to England, and we saw a picture of him, and I thought Winston Churchill was a great man who actually saved England, and he was down to earth, and he was right out there when all the bombing was going on. I saw a lot of him.
What do you think about FDR? Were you pretty proud of Franklin Delano Roosevelt in leading the United States?
Yes, I thought he did everything pretty good. There was some things that he could have done better. We had, in history, we had a ship come from Germany through England over to here, and the ship was full of refugees, and he would not let that ship dock here in the States. Yeah. I can remember that.
Yeah, had to send him back.
I was surprised when I read that.
Yeah, he sent him back.
Yeah.
Well, appreciate all your time here, Irving. We're going to talk to some high school students. Thank you for your service, and thank you for your dedication. Thank you for your service to Evansville, Indiana, too. Appreciate that.
You're welcome.
How'd you ever get to Evansville? Why'd you come to Evansville? I never did say that.
Well,
Great story.
when I graduated from high school, from college,
Where'd you go to college?
Ohio State, and
On the GI Bill?
on the GI Bill.
That helped the cost.
I was a sophomore when I was drafted, and I dropped out of college, and I went from Ohio State back home, and then I came back and went back to college. I graduated in 49, and found a job in Saginaw, Michigan with General Motors. And from Michigan, from there I got in an occupation in the oil business, and it brought us to Evansville, Indiana.
And you've been here ever since.
That's when they had a big boom going on here. and we came down, and I got in oil business down here.
In Evansville, Illinois, Kentucky, or mostly
And
Evansville?
we operated in Indiana, Illinois, and Kentucky.
What was the name of the business?
Lyco, L-Y-C-O, Lyco Oil Company.
What'd you do for them?
We did exploration, hired drillers to drill a well. We'd go out and lease the land, talk to the farmer, so forth.
Did your military experience help you in any work conducting your job as an oil man?
I would say yes,
Yeah.
yes, oh yes, yes. It would. It taught you to be a little more forceful.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you very much. It was very nice. Appreciate it.